Greetings, booktubers, and welcome back to Grammaticus Books. Welcome back to a Sunday comic edition of Grammaticus Books, a special Hidden Comic Book Gems edition. And this is, I think, the third one of these that I've made. And I'm going to go ahead and make a grouping, a category of these on the channel. So if you enjoy these, you can go out there and you can watch all three of them. And probably like every other week, I'll continue to do these because I really enjoy these a lot. Apparently not a whole lot of people agree with that I get some of the lowest view counts are on these videos. But I do enjoy them. The people who do watch them, I get a high percentage of people who comment on them. So it seems like they do enjoy them, the people who do like them. I hope you like them because I like making them. And today we're going to do one that is really good. This is a great hidden comic book gem. Actually, you have to call this a forgotten comic book gem, not a hidden one. Because it actually was commercially successful when it first came out, but it didn't have legs, and it's kind of lost a lot of its popularity or even awareness in the comic book market, and that is Howard Chaykin's American Flagg. That's issue number 1 there. I've got the first 15 issues, which covers the first story arc, which went through 1 through 12. If you're not familiar with Howard Chaykin, and I wouldn't blame you if you're not, he's not a titan of the comic book field. His name isn't up there with Jack Kirby or Neil Adams or John Buscema, but he was definitely a heavyweight and definitely was a guy who pushed the boundaries of the comic book field. He got his start in 1970. He started apprenticing under Gil Kane, and he considers Gil Kane to be his mentor. And from there, he also worked under Neil Adams and he worked under Wally Wood. And he was doing what I would describe as bit work for DC and Marvel Comics in the 1970s while he built up his comic book resume. And then in 1980, he got his first big break when Michael Golden retired from doing the art on the Micronauts over at Marvel. And they brought in Howard Chaykin, and they had Howard Chaykin do the complete comic book artwork for the next 6 issues of Micronauts, starting with issue number 13. So he really establishes himself as somebody in the field who can produce quality artwork at this point on a monthly basis. And then First Comics comes out, based out of Chicago, Illinois. And First Comics wants to hire Howard Chaykin to help promote their new comic book company. And they hire him over to work at First, and they tell him, you come up with whatever creation that you want to come up with and make whatever you like, and we'll publish it. And so Howard Chaykin comes up with his character, Reuben Flagg, in the comic book American Flagg. And that, again, that's comic book issue number 1 of American Flagg. And if you're not familiar with American Flagg, I'll try to condense this and give you the Reader's Digest condensed version. The year's 2031. The world order has collapsed. In 1996, the United States and the Soviet Union both collapsed from internal pressures. It's called the Year of the Domino. And the American and Russian governments relocate to Mars, where they're trying to reestablish control over their former countries via these corporate government entities called plexuses. And so Chicago, Illinois, the entire state of Illinois has become the Chicago Plex. Think Mega City 1. But these governments really aren't trying to reestablish their control and rebuild the United States. What they're really doing is trying to keep them in a semi-state of anarchy in order to suck all the resources dry out of the earth and bring it back to Mars. But on the surface, they're supposedly trying to keep control. And you have these ethnocentric political gangs that just run amok inside of the Plex. They have televised video episodes, weekly video episodes that are put out by the Plex of these firefights that they arrange between the gangs called Firefight Live. It comes out every week. And the most popular show is a show called Bob Violence. So the government, the Plex government, is pumping sex and violence out there to keep them in this state of anarchy so they can continue to draw the resources out. And their police are Plexus Rangers. So into this environment, you get inserted his main character, Reuben Flagg, who is a Plexus Ranger who's drafted to go to Chicago to maintain law and order, allegedly. Again, think Judge Dredd, Mega City 1. But his character, Reuben Flagg, is he's a out-of-work porn star. He was doing porn videos for the Plex as a character called Mark Thrust, but he gets replaced by a computer-generated AI version of himself. And at that point, he becomes actually a Plexus Ranger, which is sort of the character that he was playing as a video porn star, which I think is just a kind of a delicious little twist. And then they send him down to Earth to help maintain the status quo. And he gets down to Earth and he figures out very quickly that the Plex is actually there, that they're completely corrupt, and that they're not trying to reestablish the United States of America, which he knows and loves. And he decides to fight the system from within. And that's the storyline in a nutshell. And Howard Chaykin is actually, he's a very patriotic guy, but he's not patriotic. I mean, you see the American flags all over it, and his main character is named Flagg. But he's not patriotic in a jingoistic way. He's patriotic in that he loves the United States of America because of its potential to bring people of all different cultures and backgrounds, ethnicities, mental mindsets together and work together in harmony in order to fulfill their great potential. And that's what this is about, is trying to reestablish the America that Howard Chaykin knows and loves, and that his character grew up knowing and loving, although it was on Mars, through the stories of his parents. So that's the storyline and the story arc in a nutshell. Through 1 through 12 is him fighting the system and trying to save the Chicago Plex from a evil Plexus Ranger by the name of John Scheisskopf. And if you know German at all, you knew as soon as this character was introduced, you know with the name Scheisskopf that he was going to be a bad person. It's not a good name in German. But what makes this comic book such a forgotten gem? I really can't call it a hidden gem because it was commercially successful for a while. It's a forgotten gem because it broke so many boundaries when it came out. It broke boundaries about what you could do in terms of sex and violence in comics. I mean, this is not your typical Marvel DC superhero comic that was prevalent in 1983. It just smashed that stuff. It has ultra violent, it has ultra sexual orientated material in it. The women in it, all the women all the time are dressed like 1920s prostitutes that just came out of a Victoria's Secrets convention. And I'll show you some of that. And it broke those boundaries, and his artistic style was so unique. Even though he studied under Gil Kane and Neil Adams, he came up with his own unique style of art that is just fantastic. And his panel arrangements, his layouts were revolutionary. They were modern style that pushed the boundaries of what you could do with art and showed people, here's a different way that you can lay out a comic book in an adult fashion. And on top of that, the story, you've got this comic book that is rebelling against the sex and violence that is being used as media, entertainment, and to control the masses. But at the same time, it's reveling in that sex and violence. It reminds me a lot of the movie Gladiator, where Russell Crowe comes out into the arena and for 20 minutes is chopping people's heads off. And then at the end of it, the director, Ridley Scott, has him yell up at the crowd, "Are you not entertained?" And it's like, okay, you just showed us, 20 minutes of gladiatorial combat, sort of to get that entertainment value in there and show off all this violence. And then you're going to turn around to the crowd and talk about, are you not entertained? And it's sort of the same thing in here. He's decrying, sex and violence and how it's become ubiquitous and shot through all of our media and entertainment, while at the same time he's reveling in the sex and violence. But you get that sex and violence there, and a lot of people, that put off a lot of people on Howard Chaykin and this comic because they thought that's all it was. But then you start reading it and you realize that the story is fantastic. It's a great story. It's an adult story. The dialogue in it is adult dialogue that's layered. You have complex characters who never get redemption throughout the story. They have real modern story arcs and story characters and dialogue. And the story just sucks you in. And you realize that underneath that veneer of that ultraviolence and the sex that he's propagating through these comics is a really, really good story done with avant-garde art and paneling and lettering and dialogue balloons and use of things that really put this comic book on the map. Here's right here. So for his backgrounds, he came up with this paneling sequence here that would give you the background in just a nutshell, like half a page, and it was brilliant stuff. You've got a nice pose right there. He really knew how to pose people. And his artwork, his styling, even though he's doing comics, he used heavy work. Here's a good action page. If you look at the shading, he's not doing cross-hatching. He's not doing solid shades of gray or black in order to do his shading. He's doing a style what's called stippling. And I think in the past I've erroneously referred to this as pointillism. It's not pointillism. It's called stippling, where you're taking a pen and you're just doing a lot of dots. in order to do the shading. And he makes heavy use of potentially craft ink or duo shade, which is a product that prints these out off of a computer. They print this stuff out in the 1980s, and it was just a matrix of dots. And it was on sheets of paper, and artists could take it, cut it out, and put it onto their work in order to hopefully quickly give themselves shading, in order to prevent them from having to go through the laborious and time-consuming task of doing cross-hatching. And so he was famous for using that craft tint or duo shade. Although when I look at it, it doesn't have a craft tint or duo shade look to me. It has a more organic look, like he did all this stippling by hand. It's not uniform, it's not matrix. It has a very organic look to it, if you can see it on there. Now, I just might not be familiar. There might be another product of craft tint or duo shade out there that mimics that organic look, but to me it looks like it's all hand done. And there's just some beautiful work in here. Let me show you some of the work in these comic books. So this is issue number 2. So if all the women are dressed up like 1920s prostitutes, all the men are dressed in like 1920s fashion styles to like 1940s. They've got the pleated pants, the hard crest creases in the pants. He's got the white dinner jacket there, and they all look like they're out of like a Bogart movie from the 40s, or from a nightclub out of the 1920s. And Howard Chaykin puts a lot of jazz and 1920s and 30s culture into this, even though the year is 2031. He really likes that era of the United States. He likes all the styles and the art and the music that was going on in there. And I'll show you some of the sex that he was infamous for. Well, here you got on the cover of number 2, very suggestive cover with the posing. Issue number 3, again, you can see that 1920s style / Victoria's Secret dress that all the women are wearing all the time in the comic book. And then there was always a big sex scene in every issue. There had to be a very revealing, very provocative sex scene. This is the one here in issue number 3. And he becomes quickly famous for doing these provocative, revealing sex scenes in all of his books. And here he is, just using every square inch of every page. He never let a single square inch of a comic book page go to waste. And it's just great stuff. You really get into his comic books. The style, the artwork, even though it's not traditional, it really starts to grow on you. Some more action sequences, and they had really different use of the dialogue balloons and the lettering in order for sound effects. That was really revolutionary at the same time. So that's cover number 4. Here's cover number 5. And again, you got the very suggestive cover, which is very typical of these. Cover number 6, which is one of my more favorite covers. Let's see if we can find some samples of the artwork out of here. Again, very provocative with the women, and that's shot through in every issue of this comic book. And it can tend to put some people off, and it's why it's a bit of a controversial pick, and why it was a bit of a controversial comic book. But if you can get past that, you just have this fantastic adult story that is just going to suck you in, and it's great. Here's some more examples of the artwork. And then you got issue number 7, a Soviet weather satellite that was left up in orbit is activated in order to create a massive snowstorm over the United States. So for the last 6 issues, they're dealing with this snowstorm that has created an even worse situation in the Plex in Chicago. I will say that, here's the cover of number 8, that in terms of art, Howard Chaykin does struggle with a couple of things. He struggles with his figures, with drawing action sequences. They tend to be a bit stiff, and he struggles mightily with drawing vehicles. His vehicles, I'll be blunt, his vehicles are bad. He doesn't know how to draw vehicles. And so he tries to hide it a little bit. But the rest of his art is really good. But I'll show you some of that stiff action. All right, here's a vehicle. So here's a snowmobile, and it's just ridiculous. It looks like something that was, put out for a fifth grader, and he's got his hero on it, and that's how he drew all his vehicles. They were very basic. They were very poorly conceived. They tended to be too small. He's great at faces and expressions. That's one thing that he's very good at. He's good at posing. He's good at setting up a scene. He's fantastic at making facial expressions and just giving people the right emotional look for the scenes. So here's an action sequence, and you can see what I mean in this one about it being a bit stiff, which is surprising for somebody who had Gil Kane as a mentor. But his action is a bit stiff, I think. It's not bad, but it could be better. And then here's an example of the vehicle issues that he's got. So here's a couple of vehicles down here and up top, and they tend to be very basic, and he tends to stick them in the backgrounds. There's very little detail on them, and they look almost like something like an elementary school kid would draw. And again, here's another vehicle of his, and they're not good. He doesn't do a good job with them. And then here's issue number 10 with the villain, who is John Scheißkopf, another Plexus Ranger. And his name is Scheißkopf, which if you know German, that's a clue that he's going to become a bad guy. He's introduced early on as somebody who's helping out Reuben Flagg, the main character, but turns out that actually wants to gas all of Chicago in order to bring in his own ethno-political gang called the Gotterdammerkrats, which are the new Nazis. I love that name, the Gotterdammerkrats. And the story in here, it's just smart, it's provocative, it's cutting edge, it's full of satire on politics and religion, and he fills it with little gems there, like a political group called the Gotterdammerkrats. And again, that's the main bad guy, Scheißkopf. It also has a talking cat in here named Raoul, who likes to drink whiskey, play piano, and can operate an attack helicopter. Why there's a talking cat in it, it never gets explained, at least not in the first 12 issues. It's a bit of a mystery, but he is a good character who's adds a lot of levity to the comic book. And there's one of my favorite comic book covers to this series. And that's issue number 11. Yeah, issue number 11. And again, you can see that stippling effect that he does for all of his shading. Actually, that one doesn't have a whole lot of it. And then issue number 12. And that's his final issue here, where Howard Chaykin is on it. In issue number 13, he steps out. It was consuming his whole life doing this. For 1 year, all he did was make the art and do the stories and work on this comic book. And it became too much for him. So he stepped away and he just did the writing, and he continued to do the cover. So you've got a Howard Chaykin cover, but then the interior artwork was turned over to another artist. And there's nothing bad to it, but immediately it just loses its feel. That gritty, realistic avant-garde art of Howard Chaykin that really added the ambiance that you needed to this adult story, it just loses all of that with this new artist that comes on board. And it's at this point that these comic books, they start to falter a little bit. It does go on for 50 issues, but it just loses its oomph. Even the scantily dressed women, they just don't have the impact that they did with Chaykin. Chaykin knew how to do it. He was an excellent artist, a bit of a genius artist that knew how to make that impact. But that is American Flagg, and it is the Forgotten Comic Book Gem for today's Sunday issue of Hidden/Forgotten Comic Book Gems. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have opinions on Howard Chaykin and his artwork and his comic book American Flagg, if you read it, if you liked it, if you hated it, put it down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear it. He did, with this one, he was sort of still, even though he had pushed the boundaries, he was still within the limits of what was just barely acceptable in the comic books industry. And then later, Howard Chaykin became a bit infamous for really pushing that kind of over that edge. I think he had a comic called Black Kiss that became pretty infamous. And he could do some pretty strange stuff later in his career. But I think here was sort of the pinnacle of his artwork and his writing, and it all comes together here in American Flagg. And I just love this whole series. And I think this cover right here sort of sums it up. Gives you the whole picture and feel of American Flagg. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I enjoyed rereading these comics for this video here. Went back through it. It was a big trip down nostalgia lane, reminding me again why Howard Chaykin was just such a revolutionary guy who pushed the bounds out there with his artwork, with his writing, and his storytelling, and the depth of characters. It was over the top, just great stuff that you love. It's smart, it's stylish. It really just hit the mark for what the feel that he was going for. And again, that's why I call this a forgotten comic book gem. But that's it for now. Otherwise, guys, take care, be safe, have a very safe New Year's Eve. It is New Year's Eve, and I'll catch you guys in 2024.